You will never live through a more important election. You haven't yet, and I don't think you ever will. If you do, this country's got another problem. If you ever picked a year to leave it all on the field, 2012 is the year. And you all in Iowa, like I am in Virginia, are a swing state. Now, unlike you all, until 2008, no Democrat had ever won Virginia for the presidency in my life. Well, we're going to try to return Virginia to the winner's column while you all do the same thing right here in Iowa. I was asked today to talk about federalism and federalism in action, which we've been doing in my office, and pushing back on the federal government and the role of states in that. Kind of a 50,000-foot subject, but that this administration has made very, very real. You know, before taking on the typical prosecutorial duties of an attorney general, which most people associate with the office, the first thing in my oath of office, the very first thing, is to uphold and protect the U.S. and Virginia constitutions. That's the very first thing in my oath of office, and I take that very, very seriously. When the government, the federal government, got to specify here, the federal government decides to break a law or oversteps the boundaries of the Constitution, as this administration is doing, when they harm Virginia, when they harm the other states, I will push back, and there are other attorneys general that will push back. It's why I was here 2 years ago campaigning for Greta Finley, because I knew she would push back. Tom Miller doesn't do that. So as long as the list of speakers is up here speaking, you know, kind of parochially as an attorney general, you need one more at least, in addition to a Senate majority leader. So. Now, I will say, I think the federal government, since I took office, I jokingly say I was sworn in at the beginning of 2010, January 16th, and sworn out on January 17th, and it's kept up pretty steadily since then. But the federal government has been overstepping its boundaries that whole time, overstepping the boundaries of the law, and more seriously, of the Constitution. So I've been very busy pushing back. And I'll tell you, step one is simply fighting. I tell people all the time, in politics, at the grassroots, and I'm a grassroots guy, I've been outspent in all of my races. It's never been a goal, it's just worked out that way. But we've won them all. We've won them all because people committed to the first principles of this country, which is the foundation of every campaign that I've ever run, have come out of the woodwork to get us over the top. And we promised those folks in all of Virginia that we would protect those first principles, even if that meant protecting them from the federal government. And that's what we've been doing. And frankly, I've been kind of busy doing that since I became Attorney General. I'd like to be more bored. Come January 2013, we're pulling for boredom in my office. But between now and then, we are an active participant in federalism. And of course, everybody remembers separation of powers. It's talked about a lot more, the division between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Federalism I refer to as vertical separation of powers between the federal government and all the state governments. And it was designed that way. It was designed that way. If you can spare 20 pages of time, read Federalist 45 to 51. I think that was written by, Virginian. How about that? James Madison, where he talked about that separation of power in a vertical sense between the states and the federal government, where it was intended that we would push back on one another when either of those levels of government got outside of the Constitution. And that has happened through our history, and right now it is the states, a majority of states, suing the federal government to protect the U.S. Constitution from the federal government. That's what we're doing in the healthcare case. We're protecting our own Constitution from the federal government that was founded effectively in that Constitution. It's historically extraordinary. And the Founding Fathers intended for us to provide that check on the federal government out in the states, and we're doing that. It was interesting, the district court in Richmond, the lawyer for the federal government got up, his name was Ian Gershengorn, and he got up as he, has many cases before and said, "Good morning, Your Honor, Ian Gershengorn for the government." I mean, the federal government. Because there were two governments in court that day, suing one another. And that's part of what the federal courts are for, is for these disputes of authority. We are blessed in many ways in this country. One of them is that we fight these battles for first principles today peacefully. Not as they did over 200 years ago, and as over 1 million people in this country have given their lives to defend those same first principles. We don't have to put at risk what the first 56 put at risk. When they signed the Declaration of Independence and pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Many of them gave their lives, gave their fortunes, but none of them sacrificed their sacred honor. But they put it all on the line. And no one here will be asked in the next 6 months and 1 day to risk anything like they did. We have no excuses. We have been too blessed for excuses. And I expect out of you all, just as I do for myself, 6 months of some of the hardest political work that you will ever put in your lives. And I'll tell you what, we're not called to win, but we are called to fight. And you put everything you can into this fight, and I know I will come out on the right side. I know you all can do it. I know you can do it. And when we do that, we've got to reverse some trends. We've been asking as a people for government to do more and more of this and that, and every time all government ever asks of us is just a little bit more of our liberty. Just a little bit more here and a little bit more there. And now we have a central government that plans and tries to regulate every aspect of our economy and much of our lives. We don't have a responsive federal government that we control, but people are getting fed up. They've been getting fed up. Today, the idea of federalism's re-emerging. I mean, when Brenna was running 2 years ago here in Iowa, the federalism was a topic on the campaign trail, as it was for other AGs I went and campaigned for in other parts of America. You mentioned Oklahoma earlier. Scott Pruitt won in Oklahoma, and opening an office of federalism within his Attorney General's office was a plank of his platform. When have you ever heard federalism discussed in a campaign until the last 2 years? And now, because it is so intimately connected with the preservation of the foundation of this country, we hear it quite a bit, and I'm glad we do. If we've got this lousy bill we've got to try to get rid of, we ought to at least teach people some lessons, whether they're Republicans or not, so that we don't repeat these mistakes in the future. That's part of our job, it's part of our responsibility. And part of how we do that, of course, is not just by pushing back on the federal government, but explaining it along the way and bringing voters over. The conservative sales pitch is tougher than the liberal sales pitch. The liberal sales pitch is easy. Here's a check. Vote for us, keep us in power, and the checks will keep coming. That's pretty easy. They do the feel-good thing and so on and so forth. For conservatives, it's more intellectual. It's setting up a system where when our children are our age, opportunity will still be available to them. And opportunity is just liberty in the economy. And this administration is suffocating liberty for us now, today, and for our children 10 and 20 and 30 years from now.